Welcome back to Zephyr Rapids. This is going to be the last video of my Zephyr Rapids City Skylines series, and I'm going to offer an overall critique of the city that I've built, as well as an individual critique of each district. There are 9 districts overall. There are the Mendoza Foothills, Olive Plains, North Banks, South Banks, Vasquez Park, Stevens Landing, Pear Grove, Meadowlark, the 14 Woodlands, and Emerson, 3 of which are going to be exempt from an individual critique. Emerson, the 14 Woodlands, and Vasquez Park. The 14 Woodlands and Emerson because they haven't been developed yet, although the infrastructure for ore industry development has been constructed for the 14 Woodlands. And Vasquez Park because it has been demolished and rebuilt at least twice now, especially after the construction of the international airport along the southern half there. But still a work in progress, and I don't think I'd be able to offer a very good critique of it. But the other 6 I will offer an individual analysis of, and it will be on a grading tier list from S grade, A grade, B grade, C grade, D grade to F grade. Standard tier list ranking. Although I don't actually have a list to display, I apologize for that, but most of this is going to be based on subjective analysis on my part. I'm going to take a number of factors into account, like access to mass transit, access to emergency services, how utilities function throughout the district, things of that nature. But otherwise, it isn't going to be objective necessarily. It's just how I feel the progress has been made over time. I'm going to start with the Mendoza Foothills, or simply Mendoza. Now, I'll go ahead and open up the analysis tool here and focus on the Mendoza Foothills title here. 36,115 residents live in Mendoza, and 1,672 workers are employed there. It is exclusively a residential district. Now, the Mendoza Foothills, it's the closest thing that Zephyr Rapids has to a slum. Now, I did construct the Mendoza Foothills mainly as a low-income housing district, but the problem is it was even worse than I ever intended it to be, simply due to solid waste management services. It has very poor access to the district itself, as you can see by all these garbage icons here, and quite a number of individuals throughout the district become sick or ill on a regular basis, as indicated by these icons here. I suspect it has something to do with the adjacent stadiums. Mendoza, it does offer a very important niche in Zephyr Rapids. It has every service required, every educational facility, every law enforcement facility, every fire prevention facility. It has a number of clinics as well. Here, I'll go ahead and show you exactly how many clinics are in the area. Yeah, as you can see here, there are 2 medical clinics and 1 hospital in Mendoza proper. But the problem is, because so many citizens become sick on a regular basis. I'll zoom in on one as an example here. Ambulances are not dispatched from that medical clinic at this time. The other one beside the auxiliary stadium, there are no ambulances dispatched from that clinic. However, if you look at the Mendoza Public Hospital, 24 out of 30 ambulances are currently dispatched from the Mendoza Public Hospital, most of which are actually serving Mendoza itself. Now, in spite of the fact that there are 3 access points into the Mendoza Foothills due south and another one from Forest Avenue due north here, which directly attaches to Layton Avenue along the northern edge of the city limits, Mendoza is actually among the most isolated of the districts in the city, if not the most isolated. The primary thoroughfare, or rather main street, through Mendoza is Miller Street here. And I'll go ahead and go to a ground level view just to showcase what it's like to walk through this district. Yeah, there we go. As you can see here, this is a very busy bus stop along the Purple Line here. It has ample access to mass transit and services, except solid waste management, which has historically troubled the district, and that causes quite a number of issues after the garbage begins to pile up. It's very noisy throughout the district, in spite of the fact that it is solely a residential district. Now I'm keeping the game paused for the sake of simplicity. Let me go ahead and unpause this. And yeah, it's just not a very pleasant place to live, but on the other hand, it's supposed to be relatively affordable housing within the Zephyr Rapids city limits, so it does have that going for it. In terms of an overall rating for the Mendoza foothills,
we all want to be prepared. We all want to
that's
be
a
sure
difficult
that the
thing to think about, because it does serve its specific purpose throughout the city, but the quality of life in the district could be so much better, in spite of the fact that, in fact, there's another statistic I would like to show here. Let me go into the parks. See all that red along the southern portion of Mendoza?
Welcome back to Mars Official Radio.
That indicates a level of happiness or morale.
In schools, I was dissatisfied working as a teacher. Instead,
it's much higher along the western corner and the northeastern corner. But anywhere in between or along the southern swath, morale is actually very low. But as I've mentioned, an overall rating that I would offer for Mendoza, I would give it a C, specifically a C- rating, simply by virtue that it does have almost everything that the residents need, except for proper solid waste management. Because the district is so isolated, it takes a very long time for garbage trucks to reach the residential areas and where they need to go. Now the next one is the Olive Plains. I'll go ahead and open up the inspection tool again. This is basically the rich part of town. A total of 60,506 residents reside in the Olive Plains, and there are 4,431 workers who are employed in the Olive Plains. It is by and large a residential district. However, there are some small commercial zones as well, specifically leisure commercial zones. Every single residence in the Olive Plains is a so-called smart home, meaning it is a very high-tech residence, although that also means it costs more to live there and you need to pay more property tax if you actually own it. Historically, the Olive Plains has also had a waste management issue, but that has migrated to Mendoza as that is developed. Olive Plains has a lot going for it. I'll go ahead and bring up the leisure icon again. As you can see here, most of the Olive Plains, the central swath, as well as the westernmost portion here, does have a high morale. It's really those along the peripheral edges that have a low morale. the ones highlighted in red. It should be noted that this area up here, what I'm highlighting, is actually not part of the Olive Plains. That's actually part of the North Banks Commercial District. The Olive Plains border, well, I'll go ahead and show you. Right here. I'll zoom out. That is the Olive Plains border. And it is also the single largest district in terms of area and population, both, in the entirety of Zephyr Rapids. Quality of life is generally very good in the Olive Plains, and it has enough services and facilities for people to live safely and comfortably. Now I'll go ahead and offer an example on the ground level view here. Let me pick a road that actually... Yeah, here. Let me zoom in. Right about here. What is this road called? It's Lake Street, apparently. Okay. Another tourist NPC. NPCs are randomly selected whenever I do this. But as you can see here, in spite of the fact that there is a bit of traffic congestion along Lake Street, the Olive Plains is generally a very safe and comfortable place to live. It should be noted that, generally speaking, throughout the entirety of Zephyr Rapids, the crime rate is very low. I made a concerted effort to ensure that Zephyr Rapids is a very safe place to live for the most part. But as I'm walking due east along Lake Street in the Olive Plains, it's a really nice car actually, you can see that it's generally a very clean and nice neighborhood. And we are approaching the old expansion of Olive Plains, the area where the light residential and the dense residential begin to meet. That's where the noise pollution begins to increase when you reach the heavy residential areas, and generally the heavier the zoning, the higher the noise level. That's the general rule throughout the SimCity and City Skylines series of games, I would say. German flag there, I guess I could say that's a consulate. Another bus stop. Go ahead and walk across the road here. We have an elementary school here. We also have the skate park up here. And a nearby bus stop, which apparently is always busy. Go ahead and zoom out and pause. The Olive Plains is generally a very good place to live. It has the very first hospital that was built in the city, this one here. It has quite a number of police stations, although they're always busy. I've noticed that especially in the eastern half of the Olive Plains, the high-density expansion, almost all of the police stations have nearly all of their squad cars dispatched at once. That indicates they're busy responding to calls and patrolling both. There's also a southern expansion here. This street grid is yet to be zoned. This street rectangle has yet to be zoned, although these have been zoned and have begun to develop almost fully since I have laid them out. In terms of overall ranking, the Olive Plains, I would give it a B plus. Now the reason I'm not ranking it A or even S is simply because of this. Let me go ahead and show you something. See this intersection here between, let's see, that's Evans Avenue meeting Smithson Avenue, Lake Avenue, and what's this one called? Phillips Street, as well as Forest Street next to the larger bus hub. Go ahead and go back to first person view here. Alright. See how badly the traffic is backed up due south? This is more than a 4-way intersection. This is a 5-way intersection. Almost something that you would see in Times Square in Manhattan Island, New York City. But this is not New York City. The closest approximation I can offer for Zephyr Rapids, it's either very similar to Kansas City or maybe even Pittsburgh in its prime. But this intersection alone lowers the Olive Plains potential ranking for me because it impedes the traffic leading into the district from this bridge, especially the garbage trucks. You see that enormous caravan that's backed up? That's part of the reason the Mendoza Foothills has so much trouble with waste management. And I desperately need to improve that one intersection to ensure that the garbage trucks can actually reach the Mendoza Foothills in an efficient manner. The next one I'm going to critique is the North Banks, the so-called Old Downtown. Now the expansion here, or rather the expansions, this expansion along the edge of the highway is very symmetrical. It's a high-density expansion. The very first portion of the North Banks was the very first commercial district of Zephyr Rapids itself. That's this one here that's still zoned for light commercial. The only problem that the North Banks has consistently faced is a lack of educated workers for the old downtown area, the light commercial buildings. So you can see here, not enough educated workers. Again, well, okay, I take that back. Apparently that one's not poorly affected, but this one may be. Yeah, see, not enough educated workers. There's also a few abandoned buildings, as indicated by the black icons. And that has been an ongoing issue for the light commercial zoned area. It's never actually corrected itself. The same issue has not been nearly as widespread in the expansion up here. Now, the most recent expansions are the ones due west over here along the very edge of the North Banks, where one of the new hospitals has been constructed, the North Banks Public Hospital. And there's also another office park further to the north across the highway, which is near the Colossal Order offices and the Opera House. For the longest time, the North Banks has served as the primary downtown and commercial hub for Zephyr Rapids. It's where the old money is, so to speak. If you want stability, financial stability, investment stability, anything like that, you go to the North Banks if you can afford any of that. That's what it's meant to be. In terms of overall rating, well, let me go to first-person view in the old downtown here. Alright, we have another tourist NPC. Now you see up there in the sky, that's the so-called Chirper Tourism Balloon Tour. I'll have to actually highlight it to know what it's specifically called, but it's basically a hot air balloon that offers air tours of the city proper. It doesn't see a lot of use though, not a lot of visitors or tourists actually go into that facility to pay for a balloon tour. Now I'm going to try to move due north to go into the expansion here. There are quite a few roundabouts in the old downtown. It's a little bit difficult to navigate by vehicle or on foot. That's a gas station or a... Let's see here. It's starting to get dark. Okay, this looks like, well, it's the end of a road. I'll just go across, I'll just go overland. Walking into the first expansion of the North Banks. Now this road is a lot busier than I would have anticipated, but I imagine that's where, yeah, it probably leads directly to the bridge now that I think about it. Stay along the median for safety purposes. Actually, I should be on one of the sidewalks. Alright, here's a crosswalk. There we go. Now, as we enter the expansion, we notice it has a similar aesthetic as the Olive Plains. Oh, over here, center screen, that's the city tax offices, the red and white building there. Go ahead and cross the road here, jaywalk really. Yeah, it's a very similar aesthetic and layout as the Olive Plains heavy residential expansion. Go ahead and move between the buildings and try to find a place where I can go between, yeah, here, to another road here. And the North Banks is exclusively a commercial district. I'll go ahead, let's see here. Yeah, as you can see here, it's exclusively zoned for office space and commercial specifically. It employs a total of 6,368 workers. In spite of the fact that it does have that continuing problem down in the old downtown here, where they simply don't have enough educated workers to fill the employment slots. Like the Olive Plains, I would rank the North Banks at a B grade. It isn't completely developed. The Olive Plains and the South Banks are really the only districts that are nearly fully developed. Speaking of which, that is the next district I'm going to examine. The South Banks employs a total of 13,703 workers throughout the city proper. It is exclusively zoned for industrial, specifically standard industrial. It offers a very important niche for the Zephyr Rapids economy. Its main thoroughfare is Garnet Street along the south banks of the river, hence the name of the district itself. There are two sections of the district. The primary section, the old section, and the newer expansion, which I affectionately refer to as the tuna because of the shape of the street grid here. Now, historically, some problems have beset the South Banks. Every now and then it goes through a period where it doesn't have enough customers for their goods. Right now it isn't experiencing the same problem, and it is an important pillar for the Zephyr Rapids economy. I would argue that it is one of the two primary pillars along with the commercial sector that's filled by both Stevens Landing and the North Banks. Now, there isn't too much to say about the South Banks besides that. There's a lot of ground pollution throughout the entirety of the South Banks, but that's to be expected for traditional industrial. Now, from a ground level view, I'll go ahead and... what thoroughfare do I want to walk along? Jackson Boulevard. Yeah, let's go along here. And we have another tourist NPC to work with here on pause. That should have run me over, but clipped through me. That's funny. So you can see it's pretty much what you would expect from a basic industrial district. There's a lot of traffic. It has a lot of access points to the highway, often through toll booths, which is strictly by design. I wanted to manage the traffic. Historically, there's also been a lot of traffic congestion in and out of the South Banks, but that has been managed somewhat through the use of the toll booths as well as roundabouts leading directly to the highway. Ground pollution aside, it's actually a very reliable place to find work. Now, how I would rank the South Banks overall, I would give it an A ranking. At least right now. If it was having customer availability issues like it had before, I might rank it a C instead. But for the time being, it is showing a level of efficiency that I am satisfied with. So it gets an A ranking. Next up is Stevens Landing, which is the new commercial district. It's worth noting that eventually it will expand due north into this section here, bordering the North Banks along the river here. But that has not yet happened, even though the infrastructure is in place. So you can see here, it borders Meadowlark, Peargrove, North Banks, and Emerson, as well as the South Banks up here. It's a very narrow strip of land and water. The southern section, of Stevens Landing is in the rough shape of Mississippi, whereas the northern section of Stevens Landing sort of resembles Louisiana, actually. But that aside, it offers a very important niche as a nearly exclusively heavy commercial zoned area. Now, the niche that it does fill in Zephyr Rapids, the Stevens Landing is where the so-called new money is centralized. This is where all the upstarts like to open their businesses or expand their businesses from elsewhere, at least from a role-playing perspective. There are quite a number of landmarks. Well, maybe not landmarks. They're technically called unique buildings. But there are a number of unique buildings throughout the entirety of Stevens Landing, one of which is the Grand Mall and the Stevens Landing Expo Center over here on the western edge. There are two bridges leading into Stevens Landing, one of which comes directly from the North Banks, and the other actually doesn't see a lot of use. Not yet, anyway. But that will change as Stevens Landing begins to develop due north. Now, it should be noted that this particular triangular section isn't part of Stevens Landing. That's actually Peargrove. However, right here,
This is Jimmy Fry's coming here from Studio
this
Detroit.
office park and this commercial section are all Stevens Landing.
Okay. Easy, boy.
Now, as I zoom in on it, it employs a total of 8,087 workers at this time between the commercial and the office zoned areas. And I'll go ahead and go to first-person view along Fairview Street right here. Now look at that intersection. That is a 7-point intersection. Might need to change that sometime soon. We have another tourist here. Let's choose which of these 7 directions I want to go. Let's try to follow Fairview. Now, as you can see here, it's a fairly traditional downtown area. Specifically, it is the newer downtown of Zephyr Rapids. It directly competes with the North Banks in that regard. And as with anywhere else, there is plenty of bus access throughout the entirety of Stevens Landing. I didn't shirk on that. I wanted to make sure that people had sufficient access to mass transit wherever it's needed. And as we go further down Fairview Street, we start to go into the taller buildings here. You can see directly ahead. There's a lot of noise and light pollution throughout the entirety of the district, but that's to be expected due to the nature of it. Yeah, we see up here, I think that's actually a police station. Nice station wagon there, wouldn't mind driving that. Spasm Electricity. Yeah, that's a police station. With a donut shop directly beside it. That's fairly tongue-in-cheek, I would say. I wonder if the game did that deliberately. Yeah, we're right on the edge of Pear Grove right now. This street here is the border between the Stevens Landing District and Pear Grove. Royal Douche. Nice name for a hotel. Okay. Now Stevens Landing does serve its purpose very nicely. And for that reason, in spite of the fact that it has shown, right now it's not actually showing it's not showing many problems, although it should be noted that this area, well, no, that's not actually part of Stevens Landing. I'll get to that later. Historically, Stevens Landing is similar to North Banks, has had difficulty finding educated workers to fill the employment slots, but that's not actually an issue right now. And for that reason, I'm going to give Stevens Landing A grade, maybe an A-, simply because it's somewhat difficult to navigate on ground level, but honestly, it's doing very well, especially considering its past problems, which have since been sorted out. Now for Pear Grove. This was once a section of Stevens Landing, which has branched off into a tourism, commercial industry specifically. It employs a total of 964 workers, and a total of 1,620 people do live there. It's mainly a tourism-based commercial district. However, there is a strip of residential buildings along the southern waterfront there. Now, historically, it has had similar problems as the North Banks in finding educated workers to fill their employment slots, but I'll go ahead and switch to a first-person view along Garnet Street here. There we are. It's a very noisy district, but that's to be expected, really, considering that it is based on the tourism industry. And the tourism industry throughout the entirety of Zephyr Rapids, while it isn't particularly robust, it does exist. And Pear Grove... Now, why is a woman in a business suit riding a bicycle? Well, to each their own. At any rate, Pear Grove, it does serve its purpose. There isn't anything stopping it from actually attracting business. Now, if I go down here, well, no, zoom out. Parker Street. And back to ground level view between the beach volleyball courts. There we are. Now, as you can see here, there's a marina here No, let's go back to that, pardon me. There. Now there's a marina here, as well as a couple of piers and a jet ski rental, along with the beach volleyball courts. The problem with this peripheral area of Peargrove, it tends to foster a relatively high crime rate. I don't like that very much. It's for that reason alone that I could well demolish the waterfront facilities entirely. They don't seem to attract a lot of business. And like I said, there is frequently a high crime rate at the marina. I'm not sure exactly why. It doesn't offer any explanation for that statistic. I would guess either drug trafficking or human trafficking is to blame. But with that said, Peargrove, because it frequently has a high crime rate in the waterfront facilities, I would offer it a B grade. It could be a lot worse, but it could also be a lot better. Now, Meadowlark. Meadowlark is unique in Zephyr Rapids in that it is specifically meant to be a more rural enclave within the Zephyr Rapids city limits. It isn't actually part of the Zephyr Rapids metropolitan area. It's actually a township within the county itself. It's more of a peripheral area, focused primarily on agriculture industry, as indicated by this tractor icon just below the title. The thing about agriculture industry, it doesn't negatively impact anything it's directly adjacent to, be it residential or commercial, unlike standard industry, which will create a lot of ground pollution and affect the water supply. Meadowlark does have a total of 5 police stations, which I have coined the Bolkonsky County Sheriff's Department, as you can see here. It is directly adjacent to Stevens Landing and Peargrove both. But the thing about Meadowlark, there's a heavy traffic ban throughout the entire district, meaning no large trucks. Tractors are permitted, and any sort of transport vehicles are as well that are required to transport goods to and from the district. But traffic is very light throughout the district, except along one point, Scarlet Street, near the single heavy residential section in Meadowlark. Now as I zoom in, a total of 7,000 people live in Meadowlark, and a total of 7,776 people are employed in Meadowlark. Nearly 75% of Meadowlark is dedicated for agriculture industry, and nearly 25% is dedicated for residential sections. However, there is a small portion which is specifically dedicated for light commerce. We have a block here for commercial. We have another strip along this block, the exterior edge of the block, dedicated for commercial. In the original Meadowlark downtown, this very small strip of commercial buildings is located here. It should be noted that this sort of triangular shape up here, that street grid, is the original residential section for Meadowlark. Everything else expanded due north from there. Historically, Meadowlark has had a very low crime rate, even more so than the rest of the city districts, and agriculture industry has slowly but steadily thrived in the district itself. That is its bread and butter. And it's generally a very quiet and safe place to live. It has all the services required, and it's nearly a fully sufficient town in itself. It requires direct connections to the rest of Zephyr Rapids proper to thrive, but it's isolated enough, in a good way, that none of the problems which commonly beset the Zephyr Rapids proper actually spill out into Meadowlark itself. I've somehow managed that. And it's for that reason that this is the only district in the entire Zephyr Rapids city limits that I would offer an S tier rating. If you have any reason to live here or work here, or even better, if you can do both, do it. This actually isn't a bad place to live, although space is somewhat limited compared to the rest of the city. Now, as I've mentioned before, Emerson and 14 Woodlands, they have not been developed yet, although it's worth mentioning that 14 Woodlands serves as the so-called battery, or energy distribution center, of Zephyr Rapids, simply by virtue that both of the nuclear power plants are located here, as well as the prison, actually. The prison has a much lower population than I thought it would at this point. Zephyr Rapids itself, as a whole, is a fairly decent city, I would say. It has very good mass transit, especially for a US-style city that I've constructed. I don't know what it is about America. We seem to have an aversion towards mass transit in most cities. Exceptions that I can think of are, say, San Francisco, Chicago, New York. I'm fully aware that mass transit can bring its own number of problems if they're not regulated properly, but come on. All of our major cities need mass transit, and for some reason there is always a strong opposition against the expansion of mass transit whenever it comes up. It's a cultural quirk that I've never been able to quite explain or quantify, at least not at the spur of the moment. I'm sure I could write a brief dissertation on it or an essay if I actually started to research it and form my own opinions on the matter based on the data that I uncover, but I tried to break that trend in Zephyr Rapids. Even though it is a so-called American-style city, I wanted everybody to have proper bus access throughout the city. That's important to me. Another important factor is that, at least in my opinion, this probably has the best police source or police force in its fictional nation. I don't know whether or not Zephyr Rapids is in the US or in some sort of fictional nation that is similar to the United States. I'll leave that up to everyone else's interpretation. But the police department in Zephyr Rapids, along with the Bolkonska County Sheriff's Department, which is part of the overall network, they're the best in the entire industry. They do a very good job. Crime is relatively low, even though there are small pockets of high crime. This is one good example here. But I've never seen a wide swath of high crime anywhere in the districts, which shows that they're definitely doing their job. The police stations are most certainly distributed in a proper way. Worth noting that traditionally, the Zephyr Rapids Police Headquarters has been located in the old downtown section of the North Banks. I've never had any reason to relocate that. If there's ever a high crime area in the city, I would have relocated the police headquarters to that area to help manage the crime, but there has never been a requirement to do that. And even the prison itself, as I've mentioned fairly recently, there aren't even 100 prisoners in the prison yet. It has a capacity of 500, but there's only 78 prisoners there right now. Although all 5 of the prison vans are dispatched at this time. I'm actually rather proud of that accomplishment. Fire protection is sufficient. The fire department headquarters is located along the northern edge of Olive Plains in the old suburban town here, next to Spring Street. There were periods where a lot of fires have broken out at once throughout the city, but they have always responded to it in a timely manner, with one exception. The Mendoza foothills seems to have an issue. with fire dispatch, but only in one section of Mendoza, specifically along Holly and Terry Gray streets here. And that's because both Holly and Terry Gray streets are one-way streets. For example, there was a fire in this highlighted section someplace at one point. Rather than being dispatched from a fire station in the northern area of the Mendoza foothills, like here, the response came from this firehouse here. And they went all the way up this one-way street, along Holly Street, got caught in traffic along the way, and then slowly turned along Terry Gray Street to finally reach their destination in this section here. That took a long time for them to respond to the call, and it would have been much more efficient for a fire truck to be dispatched at this point. They could have gone through the roundabouts and directly accessed Terry Gray Street and moved due south from there. They would have gotten there maybe half the time if it had been dispatched from that firehouse. But on the other hand, I can't really blame the fire department because it's also in how I have distributed the Mendoza foothills. Frankly, it is not the best district in town. But that's only one example of a problem that, for the most part, is not a major factor that's a detriment in the city proper. Only one building has ever burned down entirely in Zephyr Rapids. That was up here in Vasquez Park. It was shown during one of my previous videos, in fact. And that was simply because I did not have a fire station in Vasquez Park at that time. There weren't proper services, and I didn't offer proper access, so that's on me entirely. Now, it has a very robust economy overall. Zephyr Rapids has both a very strong industry and commercial economy. It has very desirable places for residents to live, particularly in Meadowlark and the Olive Plains here. Although in spite of the fact that Mendoza isn't necessarily the best place to be, it could be a lot worse. So there is that. It has two airports, a municipal and an international airport here. It has a soccer stadium along the northern edge of Mendoza here. It has every reason to develop even further into a large and very effective, as well as a desirable city to live in. Really, this is only part of the Zephyr Rapids potential. It could expand so much further. Although Emerson is meant to be another separate township similar to Meadowlark after it's developed, although nothing has been developed in that swath yet. After the North Banks and Stevens Landing begin to expand further north, I anticipate that there is going to be a greater need for residential areas. And the areas I could expand in are in Mendoza, particularly due east and north, and in the Olive Plains, particularly due south and east, although there really isn't much room left in the Olive Plains. So Mendoza is going to be the wave of the future. If I'm able to resolve the problems that beset Mendoza on a regular basis, it should be a better place to live. In terms of an overall score for the Zephyr Rapids proper, which includes all the districts, including Meadowlark, I would offer it a B, particularly a B-. It obviously has its issues, but its issues are overshadowed by its benefits. I think I've done very well for myself in building this city. Although it could be improved in many ways, particularly there could be another layer of mass transit, maybe a metro or a subway. The taxi system has been neglected for quite some time. I could expand that. I have to solve the issues besetting the old town of the North Banks, because this has been an ongoing issue that I've never been able to solve. Mendoza, I should be able to solve that over time. It won't be nearly as isolated as it is now after the North Banks and Stevens Landing are further developed. Now, the ore industry in the 14 Woodlands, the future ore industry, as it develops, I'll need to offer careful access to the industry itself, and I need to make sure there isn't a lot of traffic congestion along the way. In fact, I doubt I'm actually going to expand the ore industry very far. It isn't going to cover the entirety of the district, I don't imagine, but it will provide more jobs for Zephyr Rapids itself once it begins to develop. Vasquez Park, it does suffer an identity crisis, but over time it should supplement the South Banks quite well as a primary industry district. And with that, I think I'm done with the Zephyr Rapids playthrough. I'm very satisfied with what I've built so far, and I do hope that those watching this series have enjoyed it so far.
Because it's with your money that we can make you more money.
I think I'll call this entire series a wrap. Thank you very much for watching, and please keep an eye out for my next video. It won't be another City Skylines video, but this isn't the last video that I'll make for City Skylines. There may be one in the future. It's just I'm going to end the Zephyr Rapids series for now. I think I've done it for long enough. I thank you for your time.
You know, just come in and talk to us. We have